DRS has been one of the most controversial things in Formula 1 for the last decade. And with it still being present around the 2022 regulations, we need to stop and ask ourselves the question, what does DRS really do and why do we still need it in the new generation of Formula 1? Hey, what's going on everyone, Vasco here and welcome back to the channel. And in this video let's explore what does DRS do and why did Formula 1 introduce it in the first place. Then we'll take a look at why DRS is still in the 2022 regulations and whether I like it or not. Let's do this. So DRS stands for Drag Reduction System. Now this is a mechanism in every single Formula 1 car that actually allows you to open the top flap of your rear wing. So this mechanism can be activated when you are in battle and when you're less than 1 second from the car in front and in a straight line, crucially. Now you can imagine that by opening the top flap of the rear wing, there's one less barrier for the airflow to go through and therefore the drag is reduced and therefore the name of the system. Now you can imagine that this drag reduction, when coupled with the slipstream effect, will give the following car a massive top speed advantage, and this will help with overtaking during a race situation. Okay, so now that we know how DRS works, let's actually talk about why it was introduced. So back in the early 2010s and up until 2021, cars were filled with winglets and barge boards. So these were tiny little aerodynamic parts that generated a lot of dirty air around the car, and that really disturbed the air to the car that was following. So this created a really big dirty air layer that really reduced the amount of downforce that the following car was able to produce in a battle situation through the corners, meaning that the car that was on the back had a massive disadvantage throughout the corners, and this meant that it was really tough to battle on track, even with systems like curves being introduced. So DRS was introduced in order to mitigate this problem by giving an advantage to the car that was following during the straights in order to compensate its losses during the corners. So even though the following car lost a ton of downforce in the corners, DRS was put in place so that they had a fighting chance on the straights. So this was put in place to try to even things out between the loss of downforce in the corners and the top speed in the straights, but in recent years it really has become a push-to-pass system. So in recent years, with the increased size of the DRS opening, it really meant that if a car was behind you with DRS, it was pretty much a guaranteed pass. Now this has really been the main criticism against DRS for the last couple of years, because if you take a look at the wing size opening in 2012 and then in 2021, you see that the DRS power has been massively increased, and this meant that once a car was behind another, instead of trying to risk an overtake through a corner, they would just wait for the DRS zone where it would be pretty much a guaranteed pass. Now in the eyes of many fans, this just ruined racing because all of overtakes seem too easy and too artificial, and that's why DRS is so controversial. Okay, and now you may be asking, if DRS was introduced to solve a problem created by dirty air, why is it still in the 2022 regulations that were designed to clear dirty air out of the picture? Well, first and foremost, we don't know if the 2022 regulations will work as intended, and what Formula 1 can't afford is to have a new generation of cars that were designed for better overtaking to reach the first race in Bahrain and then not be able to overtake. So DRS is put in place as a kind of safe mechanism to assure that there will be overtaking in the first races in order to evaluate whether the regulations work or not. Because if we start seeing a lot of overtaking in the corners, I think that DRS will be removed for the 2023 or 2024 season, and that it's put in place as a kind of stopgap solution in order to evaluate how this car generation performs and if overtaking and racing is really better without the aid of DRS. So I would not be surprised if in 2022 DRS is turned off for a couple of laps or for a couple of races in order to assess how the 2022 cars are working. So it's still there as a kind of stopgap solution in order for us to be able to evaluate whether the 2022 regulations work or not, and then it may get removed in the future. And something that you also need to know is that since the 2022 regulations are designed to create less dirty air, this is great for the corners, but what this will mean is that the slipstream effect on the straight will be lessened. So since the cars won't generate as much of that slipstream bubble that will allow the car following to gain a top speed advantage, this means that DRS is kind of needed in the straights, because even though the regulations are designed for cars to be able to follow each other more closely in the corners, this will come at the cost of the slipstream effect that helped facilitate overtaking in the straights. Now this is pretty much the opposite problem to when DRS was introduced, where cars were not able to follow each other in the corners and needed help on the straights. Now cars can actually follow each other but actually need that extra help on the straights. So DRS is still there in order for us to assess how much help does the car need on the straights, and whether we can safely remove it without impacting overtaking. And now you may be asking, but do you like DRS personally? Well, for me it's kind of a double-edged sword. In the one hand, I would rather if drivers could make the overtakes more naturally and without the help of a third-party mechanism such as DRS, because it would mean that races would be more exciting, and it would mean that the cars would actually be able to follow each other, and that drivers would have to battle out on track a lot more for the overtaking. But on the other hand, as a fan, I really like the kind of excitement that the DRS mechanism brings to racing. So as a fan, being able to watch the cars be kind of near 1 second of each other and trying to figure out whether they are in the DRS window or not is a very, very exciting thing, and it's a very, very exciting mechanic to be able to watch on TV and to know whether the car has DRS open. And when the car has DRS open, you just know that something is going to happen, and especially in 2021 with the battles of Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, I really enjoyed the effect that DRS had, and it's a mechanic that I think it's pretty cool to be able to watch as a fan. And if they are able to tune DRS in order for it not to be a clear push-to-pass system, I think it's a very good mechanic to have in the sport, such as I think that Curse was back in 2009. So as with all things, I would like to see DRS stay in the sport, but it needs to be well balanced. I don't really like the approach that they had in 2011 when the wing just opened up a little bit and it was barely noticeable, but I also didn't like the kind of push-to-pass 2021 DRS rear wings that we had. And in 2022 we seem to have a smaller opening, so hopefully they have figured out a way for DRS not to be a push-to-pass system, but for it to still be an interesting strategic element to our sport. So that's DRS, one of the most controversial additions to the sport over the last decade, but also a very interesting mechanic that I think adds a lot to the experience and to the show that is watching Formula 1. But DRS actually has one more trick up its sleeve, and it kind of helps with the new porpoising issues that we have seen in the 2022 cars. So if you guys want to know more about porpoising, I've made a full video about it right here, so you can check that out after you watch this one, and I think you guys will enjoy it. But in the meantime, that's been it for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out my video on porpoising right here. So that's been it for this video. Really hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you much for watching, and I will see you next week. Goodbye!